Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, good afternoon, dear student and also lecturers. Maybe I need 2 minutes only.
Okay.
I want to say to them that I'm just coming back from Germany and I didn't yet sleep until now. And actually, this is new student. When I was going to Berlin, they already coming here. So this time actually, my first time to see many new faces actually. And today we have Ibu Rasmussen. Anne Rasmussen. I know her long time ago, but before I know her, I know her dad first, her daddy first, her father, yeah. I met in Istanbul, yeah, for international conference on philosophy or something like that. And Ibu Anne will be speaking with us, telling us about listening to Muslim Indonesia and Indian Ocean word or something like that.
Something like that. That's
Oh,
right.
okay.
That's right.
And Pak Dadi will be moderating us to introduce and also to give some kind of small introduction to Ibu Anne. And I give you the floor, Pak Dadi, please. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Syafiq. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Can you hear me? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dadi. I'm a fellow at the Digital Media and Innovation Program here at IIIU, and I'm also a lecturer at UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta. Welcome to the Distinguished Lecture Series. Actually, this is the first one. Can you imagine?
That's great.
Yeah. So we are honored to present a distinguished scholar and expert in the field of ethnomusicology, Indonesian and Middle Eastern studies. Today we are privileged to welcome Professor N. Rasmussen, a truly distinguished guest speaker to IIIU. She is the Professor of Music and Ethnomusicology, Bicker's Professor of Middle Eastern Studies, and the director of the AIMS program in ASEAN and Middle Eastern Studies at William and Mary, the second oldest university in the US, in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia, USA. She was the president of American Ethnomusicology Association in the United States. Professor Rasmussen's expertise is Islamic and religious music. She has worked tremendously with Muslim artists and musicians, both in Indonesia and the Middle East regions. And her lecture today, titled Monsoon Melodies, Listening to Muslim Indonesia in an Indian Ocean World, is part of her new book project and promises to be an enlightening exploration of the intricate intersections of music, culture, and history in these vast regions. Ibu Anne, we are very delighted to have you here as part of our lecture series at IIIU Central Library today, and we look forward to the valuable perspective you will share with us.
Thank you so
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pak Dadi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mungkin boleh saya minta stand, ya? Boleh pakai ini. Okay, great. Everybody's on this side, right? Jangan malu, yeah. Maybe how about why don't you come move over here so I can look at you. And is this good, or should we tilt it a little bit this way? Bring the screen this way so we can get more. You know, I'm a performer, so the stage has to be. I'm going to let you do this. I'm going to let you do that. Can you put this in there, please? Thank you so much. I think this is too small for that, right? work out all the kinks, right? Yeah, this is going to work. That's great. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, it's good. Maybe just make it so it's not going to fall down. Okay, how's that? That good? All right, great. Then I can. Yeah, good. All right. It is a real pleasure to be here. I am told that I'm speaking in English. So don't let me start speaking in Indonesian or everything will take twice as long because I'll say something in English and then I'll want to translate to Indonesian. So I'm going to jump right into my talk and I hope that I hope it's interesting to you and I hope that it stimulates a good discussion among us. I'm very interested in who you all are and what you're doing here, what kind of studies you're pursuing and how this work might intersect with the kinds of things that you're interested in. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. I work and teach at William and Mary, which acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are now the original inhabitants of the lands of our campus today. The Cherokee, the Chickahominy, the Eastern Chickahominy, the Mattaponi, the Monacan, the Nansemond, the Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawomic, the Upper Mattaponi, and the Rappahannock tribes, and we pay respect to their tribal members, past and present. As Pak Dadi said, I'm at the second oldest university in the United States, and we celebrate all the great things about the United States and all the bad things about the United States, and acknowledging the land that we colonized is part of that exercise of recognition. Just a little bit of background about myself. My first research for my dissertation and subsequent years was on music in the United States, but really looking at the music of ethnic groups in the United States, of immigrant groups in the United States. And this is one of my co-edited volumes that has chapters on many, many different communities in the US, and also the ways in which these communities sort of interact with the government, waves of immigration, and the role of culture and music in that context. My work specifically was on the music of Arab Americans, right? A large community of people from basically greater Syria, which is Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan. These are very big issues right now, right, in the United States. And I saw the beautiful murals when we got off the road. Amazing. I would love to go back and take some pictures. But a very dynamic Arab American community in the United States for more than 100 years. As a part of that research, I learned to play Arabic music, and so I play the instrument called the oud. I also play the qanun, which you see me here. This is the qanun, and you can see us all with our masks hanging because we just took the picture off to take the photograph. It's Arabic, yeah. This is all Arabic music that I do with my students. I've also done research in the Arabian Gulf in Oman, and we just finished editing a book called Music in Arabia with an international cohort of authors from the Gulf and from Europe and the United States and Australia, I believe, also in various aspects of music in the Gulf. And I did that research to sort of compare with what I'd been doing here in Indonesia, which was to work for a very long time at this book, Women, the Recited Quran and Islamic Music in Indonesia, and then the Indonesian translation of that book in 2019, published by Mizan. And I think that the translation is interesting to me. I didn't make up the translation. This was the publisher's translation, Merayakan Islam dengan Irama Perempuan, Seni Tilawat dan Musik Islami di Indonesia. We can talk about that later. So I'm currently at work on an open access, media-rich book that uses the 5 pillars of Islam, or Arkan al-Islam, as an organizing device in order to pull back the curtain on the resonant practice of religion. I believe that after more than 25 years of engaging with Muslim Indonesia, I have, in the words of activist, public, and community artist Steve Prince, quote, an obligation to make things known that people cannot otherwise see or hear. I can distill the thrust of my work thus far into 3 objectives. First, I want to bust the myth of incompatibility that plagues Orientalist and oversimplified assumptions about music and Islam by inviting readers and listeners into the dynamic soundscape of religious life in Southeast Asia. Second, I redress the marginalization of Islamic Southeast Asia, which is roughly equal in size to all the Arabic-speaking countries combined. Third, bringing the indigenous category, Seni Musik Islam, or Islamic musical arts, from the periphery to the mainstream of ethnomusicological inquiry constitutes a kind of scholarly activism that speaks to inherited epistemologies in my own field. While I may have been standing alone in this field in the mid-1990s, that was a long time ago, the mid-1990s, I've been joined by numerous among my colleagues who have not only turned their attention to the intersection of religion and music, but who have also begun to focus in earnest on music in and as religion in Southeast Asia, right? So music in religion, music as religion in Southeast Asia. In representing this rich domain of Indonesian musical culture, I'll mention 5 methods. Women out loud. I strive to represent a womanist experience, to be women-centered in my inquiry and writing, and to be critical of studies where women are absent from consideration. In spite of whatever feminine conventions they might display, and in spite of whatever notions of power or unpower we might map onto their covered bodies, and here I'm speaking very much to my colleagues in the West, the women I hear the women I hear are or can be loud, high, virtuosic, proactive, strong, energetic, powerful, and also fun. In my time with women and girls, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, professionals, amateurs, city dwellers, and villagers who give voice to religion in ritual and recreation, I have asked questions about motivation and permissibility. The connection I hear between the two, motivation and permissibility, is one where women who are able, through knowledge and performance, to provide and enhance religious experience have a license to operate within the constraints of patriarchal society. And let's just break the ice here with a little musical example. Can you go ahead and click that one? There's just a minute of example. You can make it a bit louder. Against a unitary Islam. I endeavor to write about action, process, and experience rather than about a unitary Islam that does things to peoples and cultures. Following Laila Abulurod, I try not to traffic in generalizations, reductions, and essentialism, or to use, as she writes, the details and particulars of individual lives to produce typifications. Rather, I've tried to be sensitive to the ways people create and are shaped by various institutions, like religion, like family, like education, profession, and through individual and communal acts, right? So if you haven't read Laila Abou-Lughod, I highly recommend her work. This is from Writing Women's Worlds, but her other major book, I think, is called Bedouin Stories, I believe. And so the idea is not to say patriarchy is this, but what is your experience of patriarchy? What is my experience of patriarchy? What is your experience of the state, right? As you try to build faculty here, what is your experience of, higher education? With the huge responsibility of representing those who have been and are often misrepresented, I am skeptical of the institutionalized cliches that have and can creep into Indonesianist ethnomusicology. And we can talk about the kind of cliches that I have to slog through and that also I try to avoid in the Q&A. Shahzad Bashir interrupts the quest for a chronological paradigm of Islam as a world religion, recognizing the ways in which, quote, most scholarly production occurs within frameworks and core understandings that were first established by self-proclaimed Orientalists as early as the second half of the 19th century. He warns against the a priori attribution of an essential core to Islam that unifies all things Islamic into a single system. This approach, he writes, allows us to, quote, observe connections, influences, and causation between human acts and events without the necessity of a reified Islam that must stand as an essence behind the easily observable apparent diversity. Now, I'm hardly immune to the Orientalist inheritance to which Bashir refers, but I hope that my past writing, my current book project, and merely my presence among people in the business of religion in Indonesia has been a counterweight to some of the assumptions that have been made and written into the ethnomusicology of Islam, assumptions that, in my opinion, need some fine-tuning. The power of sound. Coming from a culture as I do that values silence and order, I have marveled at the power of sound in Indonesia and the importance of hearing as key to cognition. And I've tried to convey my own journeys in echolocation and audio knowing. There is great prestige associated with a beautiful voice, and the way that voice is rehearsed and evaluated is central to my work. Islam in the Atmosphere, the title of one of my book's chapters, is a noise-affirming phenomenon that marks territory, conveys information, proclaims power, and builds community through the aesthetics of speech, song, music, and noisy commotion. And those of you who are new to Indonesia might, remark at what a noisy place it is. It looks like this campus is not going to be a noisy place. This campus was built with the aesthetics that come from my culture, that value silence and order and individual space, right? But if you go to UIN on Jalan Haji Juanda in Ciputat, it's a whole different situation, right? So I suggest if you haven't been there yet. This is not yet, because this is still new. It's still new, right? Okay, hopefully, let's make it noisy, right? The most recent example of my dependence on collaborative knowledge was during the lockdown of 2020 and 2021, when I and two colleagues in Indonesia, Pak Dari Darmadi and Muhammad Asad from Universitas Hashim Ashari and Pondok Pesantren Tebu Ireng in Jombang, we embarked on a cooperative online research project that brought together some 30 actors on the virtual stage of Muslim cultural production during the height of the pandemic, and I'll speak a little bit more about this later. The festivalization of religion. Shadowing reciters among a blossoming network of consultants since 1996 for competitions and meetings and training sessions and classes and even family vacations has introduced me to folk, regional, and popular cultures in Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and all over Java, and to the intertwining of religious fanfare with civic life. Perhaps someone would see this as a narrow topic of reciters led me to intersectional worlds of religion, politics, gender, social class, and competing and complementary aesthetics as they emerge in contexts ranging from the small village to the presidential palace. These relationships continue to lead me to events where musical arts act and as ritual perform the work of creating and teaching history and social structure, creating and teaching memory and aspiration, nostalgia and belonging, in addition to, of course, creating community. So ethnomusicologists believe that music creates community, right? That through musical events, processes, rehearsals, performances, competitions, and so forth, community is created. In his recently published book, What is Religious Authority?, Ismail Fajri al-Attas refers to this work as articulatory labor. He writes, if every Islamic social formation is a product of articulatory labor, then differences among Islamic communities can be explained in terms of articulatory variation. This permits us to develop a non-holistic and non-historicist reading of Islam and Islamic history, one that portrays the transmission of Islam not as a linear process, but as a discontinuous reproduction of different Islamic communities, all of which may be interrelated without necessarily forming a whole. Now, in charting the proliferation of Muslim community in Indonesia, we can look to the production of musical style as an extremely effective mode of articulatory labor. So with this introduction, I'm going to turn to 4 more parts, and the concluding remarks are very, very short, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the conservative turn in Muslim Indonesia. I'm going to talk about the Indian Ocean turn in ethnomusicology. I'm going to present a micro-history from the Konferensi Islam, Asia Africa, Bandung, 1965, and talk about 3 little aspects of that conference that I think magnify or zoom in on this Indian Ocean-ness, and then present some concluding remarks. This project, my research in Indonesia, began in the fall of 1995 with a chance meeting at the Festival Istiqlal and then an invitation by this gentleman on the left to the Institute Ilmu Quran, which is on the right, just across from UIN Jakarta. Thrilled with this entirely new research scene, I had enough data upon return to the US in summer 1996 to write an article, and that article won the Jaap Kunst Prize. And let me just mention here, not to brag, but Jaap Kunst was a huge ethnomusicologist, a Dutch ethnomusicologist who worked primarily in Indonesia and who invented the term ethnomusicology. So it's kind of ironic that, I'm sort of following in Jaap Kunst's footsteps, whatever kind of a colonial dude he was. Along with that material and my work on Arab American music and community, the topic of my dissertation, I was moving along toward tenure. I also applied for a Fulbright scholarship. When I returned to Indonesia 3 years later, in January 1999, with a Fulbright grant and my family of 4, everything having to do with religion had become political. My grant period had in fact been delayed for 6 months due to extraordinary unrest and violence in Jakarta and beyond. This was known as the riots of May 1998. The financial crisis, or Krismon, Krisis Moneter, was also in full swing. President Suharto's 32-year autocratic rule was over, with his vice president, B.J. Habibie, installed as interim president while the country prepared for its first ever democratic elections. So this was crazy. I thought I was coming to study music, and I realized, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn. Like every day, reading the Jakarta Post and trying to figure out what the heck was going on in Indonesia. Now, you're way too young to recognize this, but appreciate that I have saved this bag of ikan krismon since 1999, right? And the whole point of ikan krismon is that, of course, nobody has any money. You don't have to feed the fish. You can just put them in water and they'll live forever, right? They're just made out of plastic. Also, just this is the number of political parties that sprung up in 1999. We have this framed in our house. And this is an example that they called school off for 3 months. I think it was 3 months, Pak Daddy? 3 months just for the campaign season, right? Which was great because all of these schools decided to have their kids learn how to play rabana and hajir marawis and, you know, do all these kind of extracurricular religious activities. And of course, you know, here's B.J. Habibi greeting people at the Wayang Festival in 1999. So I was fortunate that the Fulbright office in Jakarta, Aminef, assigned as my mentors and sponsors leading intellectuals at UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, the National Islamic University, both in 1999 and in 2017. Although they were far from music studies, Almarhum, the late Professor Azumardi Azra, and later in 2017, Mashikuri Abdullah, were interested in the questions I was asking and put me into conversation with students, professors, and visiting scholars who, as Indonesians raised and trained in the Islamic education system, harbored, quote, rational, non-denominational, and interdisciplinary approaches to Islam, and who represented a progressive, inclusive, and tolerant understanding of religion in Indonesia. And there I'm quoting Pa Azra, right? So no other ethnomusicologist was sponsored by the Islamic University. They all go to the arts universities, ISI Jogja, ISI Solo, STSI, di mana saja, right? So that was pretty lucky for me. The conservative turn that we were all witnessing in 1999 and during the Reformasi was only given this name about a decade later by esteemed scholar of Muslim Indonesia, Martin van Brunissen, in his 2011 working paper, What Happened to the Smiling Face of Indonesian Islam? Muslim Intellectualism and the Conservative Turn in Post-Suharto Indonesia. So this is just to say, in 1999, when all of this was happening, we didn't walk around and say, oh, this is the conservative turn. We're living through the conservative turn, right? It was only, you know, in retrospect that people started saying, ah, there was a real change here. As I worked toward the eventual publication of my monograph, during this first decade of the millennium, many among our colleagues also perked up their ears to the churning Islamic soundscape. David Harnish and I organized several panels at different conferences, and that led to the germination of this book, a collection of 14 chapters by an international cohort of ethnomusicologists, including Indonesians, including Frankie Raden, who is part of this university. Is that right? So he has a chapter in our book. When I returned to Indonesia with a new project in mind in January of 2017, this splintering effect of Suharto's fall, what Van Brunissen calls the conservative turn in 1999, had matured into a visibly divided Indonesia, and maybe an audibly divided Indonesia as well. So my base camp is the home of Ibu Maria Ulfa, who is an esteemed world-known reciter of the Quran. And this is her Pondok Pesantren. This is in Ciputat Baru. And I'll just mention 3 things that had changed. Because of the neighbors' whispers about students studying and worshiping together at the family's Pondok Pesantren, the family put screens, like those hospital screens that separate 2 beds. They put screens to separate the boys from the girls because the neighbors were talking. Her husband, Dr. Mukhtar, he said he received complaints about the amplification of recitation, of classes and events from neighbors who had never before complained that their pesantren was too ramai. Right? This concept is, connotes busy, noisiness, excitement. It doesn't translate into English, believe it or not. There's no real translation of that really important term. some of Ibu Maria's cassettes from the 1980s and 90s, she has like, you know, silver, whatever, you know, platinum awards and those fancy gold records of her cassettes that she did. But they were re-released on YouTube by the original producer. But the original producer, they actually photoshopped the covers to extend the jilbab over her inch of hair that was exposed. Now this was the height of fashion in the 1980s. But in response to this kind of sartorial critique that rained down in social media, something like beautiful music, great voice, really good tajweed, but they should really cover their awrat, right? So let's just think about this word. We use it all the time. Leila Ahmed talks about awrat as the many definitions, shameful and defective things. Its meanings include blind in one eye, blemish, defective, the genital area, generally parts of the body that are shameful and must be concealed, women's voices, and women. All right, so in some Indian languages, that word just refers to women. The controversy, so this we're talking about in 2015, right? So I'm coming in 2017, but everybody's asking me about this controversy in 2015 surrounding a reciter who used Javanese melodies to recite the Quran for President Jokowi at the palace, was a kind of harbinger and allegory for the public shaming and eventual incarceration of Ahok, a Christian of Chinese descent who was eventually jailed for allegedly blaspheming the Quran. And this is a story that I recount in my contribution to this very recently published book, which you should get for your library, Sounding Out the State of Indonesia, edited by Andy McGraw and Chris Miller from Cornell University. Okay, let's talk about the Indian Ocean turn in ethnomusicology. Julia Bile and Jim Sykes recognize my work as part of what I'll call the Indian Ocean turn in ethnomusicology. And it's true that beginning in 2010, I began new research in the Arabian Gulf, looking for the Arab roots of the Indonesian roots and shoots, right? The Indonesian traditions that I had observed. You know, they're supposed to come from, you know, Arabia, from Hadramaut. And I was looking for either the roots of those traditions or maybe some kind of creative feedback loop between Indonesia and other parts of the Arab world. And you know, the Indian Ocean had been present in so much of what I had already learned. For example, Lagu Makawi, the Meccan melodies for reciting the Quran. In the olden days, reciters went to Mecca. That's where they learned to recite, and they brought these melodies back. Now, after about the middle of the 20th century, 1950s, well, first there's steamship travel, but then radio and airplanes. Then we have all the reciters coming from Egypt, right, who are making the Egyptian style of recitation, and all those famous reciters really catch on in Indonesia. And then you have something like this singkatan, Behusven Jasad, which reminds reciters to remember the musical modes. Apa-apa, it's good noisy, right? It's good to be noisy. Such a quiet place. Behusven Jasad, you know, to remember Bayati, Makam Bayati, Hijaz, Sabah, Nahawan, Jiharka, Sika, and Ajam. So that's another aspect. And you know, we see these marwas. You can also look to material culture. So these are marwas, or plural marawis. This is hajar or mahjar drum. This is in Jakarta, a shop in Jakarta. In my research in Oman, this is in Salalah, which is right on the Yemeni border, and we see these are the same drums with similar kinds of performance practice. Let's look at a really great example of hajar marawis. So this is another video. Great. Great fieldwork moment there. Just really, really, really wonderful, these guys. Yeah. So, you know, during my research, I learned that the first ever international Musabaqa Tilawatil Quran, the Quran competition, occurred at the Asia-Africa Conference in 1955 in Bandung in West Java. And I happened to mention this at the conference that was the impetus for this book, Sounding the Indian Ocean. It was just published in 2023, and it really charts this Indian Ocean turn. And Pat Shafiq, this is my copy, but I brought it for the library. So, you're welcome. We can have a picture later on, right? It's also an open access book, I realize, so you can, like, it's published by the University of California Press, like my book will be, so you can actually look at it and read it for free. Anyway, so I mentioned this, and the editor said, Anne, you have to write about the Bandung Conference. Well, I didn't really know much about the Bandung Conference, but they said, you have to find out, like, what was the situation? Did they do this international recitation conference? I mean, did they do this MTQ, right, Musabaqa Tilawatil Quran, at the conference? So I started digging. Quranic recitation was likely to have been used as a frame for various ceremonial events at the 1955 conference. Naoko Shimazu, who's a diplomacy historian, describes the meeting of the, quote, combined dynamism of the newly decolonized independent states of Asia and Africa as a mythical moment that highlights the symbolic meaning generated in and by performance and pageantry. So we know there were parades with everybody wearing, you know, their native dress and so forth. So we know that this kind of symbolism, this artistic symbolism, was really important. Now, I think that engaging in rituals at the margins of international civics, practicing Muslims from the 29 emergent nations gathered in Bandung would have rubbed shoulders in events both performative and communal, activating what Ronit Ritchie calls an Arabic cosmopolis, or cosmopolis, if you will. While it's plausible that festivalized presentations by reciters were a part of the cultural entertainments that played on in the margins of the 7-day conference, I was never able to corroborate this. I was never able to really find out that this was happening at the first conference. What is certain, however, is that Quranic arts and Islamic culture were central to the second iteration of the Bandung Conference, the Conferensi Islam Asia Africa, held 10 years later from March 6th to 14th in 1965. So one thing to think about is, why don't we know more about this conference? I think if you put it in the context of 1965 and think about what happened in September and October of that year, that's kind of a year that we don't talk about so much, right? It's kind of the dark history. Khairatun Syasin affirms that the 1965 Conferensi Islam Asia Africa, or Bandung 2.0, as the culmination of 15 years in search of an Islamic cultural identity. The conference was attended by 107 delegates from 33 countries, 4 observers, and 40 delegates and 21 advisors from Indonesia, representing the full spectrum of the Islamic community in Indonesia at the time, and confirming Indonesia's place as a center of Islamic revival and renaissance, equal to the existing examples of Turkey, Egypt, Palestine, and India, right? So this is really pretty significant. What clicks for me is the emphasis on Islamic praxis, both as cultural and artistic, on religion as a wellspring for creativity, and on art as an act of da'wah, or daqwa, as we change that word, that Arabic word, to Indonesian. And among the numerous organizations that sprung up in the 50s and 60s, we have the Association for Islamic Arts and Culture among the Muhammadiyah in 1956. And then in NU, we have Les Bumi, the Lembaga Seniman Budayawan Muslim Indonesia, which has been going from 1962 to the present. What is this funny noise? Oh, it's birds. Oh, how nice. I thought maybe somebody was playing a video game. Okay, birds, how sweet. Okay. So, you know, interesting that these arts organizations, these arts and culture organizations are such an important part here. And, you know, I have been with Orang Les Bumi many times. This is in Malang, and I'm with this very important person, Kiai Agus Sunyoto, and I was surprised that they put me on their Eid al-Fitri card. What's that? The late, yeah, who passed away in 2021, yeah. And author of many things, among them the Atlas Wali Songo. So huge honor to be with them. I was just with Orang Les Bumi in Bandung last week, who presented a whole workshop for me on traditional arts that they are safeguarding, right? Okay. Okay, one second. Here we go. Now, all right. The Quran competition at the second Bandung conference originates with the extraordinary acts of ordinary individuals. This micro-history centers on Basori Elwi, who 1927 to 2020, also died recently. He's an educator, a competition coach, a judge, a recording artist, and a reciter known for developing and popularizing the melodic mujawid style of recitation of the Quran. Beginning in the 1950s, before the Subuh prayer, Elwi and 4 of his friends performed tabkim and salawat, songs in praise of the Prophet Muhammad, and verses of the Quran at the ancient Ampel Mosque in Surabaya. And this is still a site of worship and pilgrimage to the grave of Sunan Ampel. Do I have a... yeah, it's still a really important site of pilgrimage for Sunan Ampel, one of the 9 saints, or Wali Songo, who introduced or spread Islam in Java. The singing and recitation by Elwi and his friends caught the attention of the locals, and his group subsequently launched a regular Friday evening Laylat il-Quran, or Evening of the Quran. The coalition of interested reciters spawned an organization of male and female reciters and memorizers from across Java and beyond. And finally, the Jamiat al-Qura wal-Hufaz was formally established in 1951 by Kiai Washid Hashim, Indonesia's first Minister of Religious Affairs. So just a little genealogy here. Last year I was lucky enough to be invited to Tebu Ireng and stay right in the pesantren, in the home of the Kiai, and you walk out of my bedroom and here's the lineage of Hashim Ashari, and then on the right, Wahid Hashim, the first Minister of Religious Affairs, the son of the founder on the top, the founder of NU, and a really important resistance fighter. And then his son, Gustur, or Abdurrahman Wahid, who was elected in 1999 when I was here. So just kind of, all these connections are sort of exciting. This organization exists to the present day, this organization of male and female reciters. Founding member Basori Elwi was invited to recite for President Sukarno at the palace, and then to appear at the inaugural first conference in 1955, and then to assist in the planning of the first international competition in Quranic recitation at the Konferensi Islam Asia Africa in 1965. Immediately following, immediately following this, the conference, Elwi and 2 of his colleagues embarked on a government-sponsored mission to 9 Arab nations, plus Pakistan and India, using recitation as their, or tilawa, as their alat, or tool, or chara, of diplomacy, right? This idea of tilawa, alat, diplomacy, recitation as a tool of diplomacy. So I submit that with its best reciters in the show, Bandung 2.0 cultivated a sense of shared aesthetics within what Enseng Ho has promoted as Inter-Asia, an old world crisscrossed by interactions between parts that have known and recognized one another for centuries. Thus, cultural capital among the Bandung participants was shared not only through discourse, but also through practices that participants could experience and bring home. Now, let's just zero in on the Indian Ocean-ness of three features of this micro-history. First of all, Sunan Ampel, his history, his heritage is multinational and multi-ethnic, Arab, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Javanese, just as a start. And he's like others among the Wali Songo credited with artistic initiatives. In my 2005 article called The Arab Aesthetics in Indonesian Islam, I cite him as the composer of Lir Ilir, a Javanese children's song that was adapted by Emha Ainun Najib, or Chat Nun, who is an author, a poet, a dramaturg, and in his words, an ulama mbling, or naughty cleric, and his ensemble, Kiai Kanjeng. Released on their VCD, Berhijrah dari Kegelapan, Flight from Darkness, right after the May 1998 riots, the song combines Javanese and Arabic language across the backdrop of Jakarta burning, right? So back to the riots of May 98. The song remains on the playlist of the Javanese Muslim vernacular, and here's a relatively recent performance of Lir Ilir and Solawat Badr in Surabaya, February 2017. And this isn't Kiai Kanjeng, but rather it's one of its many offspring, its spin-off groups. You want to hit the video? Thank you. So this Javanese children's song and the Arabic solawat, the gamelan, the Rabana frame drums and marawis, which you can't see in that small clip, and the whirler, a relatively new phenomenon, all point to ongoing trans-regional conversations across what some have called the Muslim Sea. A second feature in our micro-history that I want to amplify is the salawat or tarhim, performed from the minaret of the Ampel Mosque before the Azan by Basori Elwi back in the 1960s. So singing songs in praise of the Prophet, salawat, shalawat, a practice that is objectionable to some of Indonesia's Muslim communities, is omnipresent elsewhere, particularly at times of religious intensification, like Ramadan or like the Maulid month, Rabi al-Awwal, which just ended not long ago. In fact, the tradition of salawat has experienced an algal bloom from the relatively demure performances among Qasida Rabbana groups, like the one that we saw at the very beginning of the presentation, or in the routine gatherings of Emha Ainun Najib and Kiai Kanjeng, where thousands of participants join in the singing of salawat, but also participate in prayer and zikr and wirid and Q&A with guests and local celebrities, or enjoy hilarious theater skits. Now, salawat events have become like rock shows involving thousands of participants. Who just sing salawat in Arabic, Javanese, and Indonesian opposite a stage of charismatic sheikhs, often of Hadrami descent. And the most infamous of these rock stars being Habib Sheikh of the central Javanese city of Solo, who I had a chance to be with 2 days ago, Wednesday, which was pretty amazing. And I went to his headquarters because he does a Wednesday evening routine reading of Simtu Dror, but he didn't do it. It was canceled. So there was a pengajian siang, and that was very productive. I'm sure it's already all over YouTube. But this thing was happening the next day, Majlis Azahir with Haji Zain al-Abidin Sigat al-Sigat, I'm telling you, I lost hearing. I mean, seriously, I don't think I've ever been to anything so loud in my life. It was an amazing, I mean, just the aesthetics of the big show. I mean, it was like a metal show. It was like, you know, like the Grateful Dead, or, you know, it was really, I mean, the emphasis on just the spectacle of performance, no matter what they were singing, right? And with the whole crowd singing along was pretty amazing. That was not happening in 1999, I'm telling you that. All right, so let's, as my last little example, and then I'm all done. And you know, we could go back and look at this Simpu Dror, that's actually a video, but let's not worry about that right now, from near Malang, which is also kind of wrapped up in this phenomenon, I think. But let's just talk about the very last aspect of, let's turn up the volume on recitation as a tool of diplomacy and community around the Indian Ocean. Now, during the spring of 2021, Dadi Damadi and Muhammad Asad and myself invited Kiai Haji Rifat to join our online focus group discussion with professional Quranic reciters and educators, right? So what do you do during the pandemic? I mean, reciters rely on community to recite, to teach, to perform, to show up to people's events and get paid, right? What do they do? So, you know, I have Prof. Dadi to thank for introducing me to Kiai Haji Rifat from Pondok Pesantren Al Falah and Al Falah Dua, huge Pondok Pesantren in near the Bandung area. And this was a time when people worldwide were reeling from the pandemic and adapting to quarantine, social distancing requirements, and we were all waiting around for the vaccine to be developed, right? So we're done with the pandemic now, and it seems behind us. But I mean, I remember calling you one night, and you had been to 3 online funeral ceremonies in one day, right? I mean, we really heard some extraordinary stories, right? So this was really an intense time, and the way that we were, I thought it was really interesting the way we were all experiencing it together. Like us as professors, we had so much in common trying to teach online. So Kiai Rifat, he wears many hats. He's the director of these 2 big boarding schools. He's part of the West Java Committee of NU, Nahdlatul Ulama. He's a member of the Brotherhood of Mosque Imams. He's a mutawif, or a guide for the Hajj and the Umrah. And he told our group about the experience of hosting a Hafzat al-Quran, or a recitation party, on Zoom. While not ideal, he admitted, the format allowed for several international participants to join, particularly the sensation Sheikh Raji Ayub from Tanzania. So here is my translation of Kiai Rifat down here in the smiling person in the corner. He says, so I think it turns out that this pandemic also provides a kind of avenue for us to be creative. Yes, including making international haflas through Zoom meetings. It is true that what we love, we can experience through Zoom. It's not as beautiful as live because we can't set the sound system and so on. But in my opinion, there, through Zoom, we can see and hear the authenticity of the reciter's sound without amplification or effects. It's amazing. We can listen to Sheikh Ayub's authentic voice without the echo effect and the delay. Even though the participants are far away, the view is very close. That's how that emotional connection works. In the Zoom room, we feel very close. So let's watch one single phrase of this reciter from Tanzania. You know, and it was interesting when I asked Rifat for a really good example of good recitation. He said, oh, go listen to this guy. He's amazing. His variations are amazing, right? And you can find some really wonderful videos of him like driving in the car and reciting with his friends. But this is one that I found of hafla here in Indonesia. So let's just listen to one phrase. And if you're not a connoisseur of Quranic recitation, and I'm sure you know most of you have this in your daily lives at some point, one thing about a recitation is the single breath phrase, right? So you ambil nafas, and then, you know, and I always challenge my students Take a breath with the reciter and hold it or let it out slowly and do not breathe again until the reciter breathes. The other thing you want to appreciate is the volume. You don't try to recite the Quran like that, but you recite it in a very present voice, right? So just the intensity of the voice, also the range, and then the beautiful kind of embroidery, the decoration. I mean, it is, a good reciter is as virtuosic as the best opera singer. There's no question about it. You heard it here first, it's true. So let's just listen to one phrase. Also, look at, like, I'm just noticing this, but this guy here, I think it's this guy. You'll see the way the participants, they're getting into it, right? They're not singing solo, they're really getting into it. And he starts like gesturing with his hand as he's, so in this one minute phrase, there's so much going on. Well, go ahead and. Such amazing artistry. Okay. So we see with this last example that the reciters in the Ummah below the winds, right? We talked about that expression, are part of a communal sound world within an Indian Ocean, Asia, Africa. It's an ancient predisposition that has proven resilient to political and scholarly categorization by nation, race, class, gender, and religion, and that has only been boosted by the internet-based capacities of the day. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned monsoon melodies, listening to Muslim Indonesia in an Indian Ocean world. What if we were to listen for the musical discourse of the scaffolding of Islam, these reductive 5 pillars about which I quiz my students whenever we're ready to launch into a unit on the Islamic world? I say, what do you know about Islam? And they say, Ramadan, the Hajj, Zakat, Salat, right? There's 5 things. But what if we were to ask, what would the Shahada sound like? What is the audio palimpsest of 5 daily prayers? How would we transcribe the month of Ramadan or the season of pilgrimage? Can we know Zakat by its music? And what if we could introduce our students and gift our generous consultants with an open access book that is free to read, easy to find, and rich with audio-visual materials that, to me, are central to any understanding of religious life in Indonesia. American novelist Toni Morrison famously advised, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't yet been written, then you must write it. So this year, I'm writing that book, inshallah. And I thank you. I thank you for your time and attention, and I also want to congratulate Prof. Shafiq for not falling asleep. Pretty amazing. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I'll let you take it over, Pat Daddy.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Rasmussen, for her captivating and I think very lively presentation as well. Let us give her a round of applause once again. Thank you so much. And usually we do have like Q&A session, but since Ibu Ann also a performer, why don't we like kindly invite her to also perform? Agree?
Why don't, how about a little bit of Q&A. Let me,
Okay. Okay. Let's open the floor for a little question and a session. Maybe, do we have like maybe 3 questions? Yeah? Someone at the back? Yes? Okay, maybe you go first, and please mention your name and which department you're from. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just need her to maybe prepare herself. Okay. Maybe she will just prepare. Okay. Shall I ask then? Okay. My name is Egi. I'm from the Department of Islamic Studies here in this university. I'm a master's student. Hello. So welcome, Prof. N. My friends of yours since my bachelor degree in Yogyakarta, because I learned living Quran and the way that the living Quran and the way that people live the Quran in their everyday life through recitation and so on. So currently I'm doing research on religious soundscapes with Pak Nur Haide and also with Christian Lang, and we are studying the way that certain scholars limit the use of certain religious instrument and also religious instrument and also musical tools. Tools. So for instance, for example, in 1940s, Hashim Ash'ari forbid the use of kentungan. This is the hollow idiophone made of bamboo and stone. He argued that the voices, the sounds produced by this tool is similar to the one of a bell from the cathedral. So my question is simple then. To what extent to what extent musical tools and instruments constitute and maybe are constituted by the religious identity? Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great. Egi, right? Okay, from Islamic Studies. Sure. Yeah.
Just quickly before I don't forget. Of course, it's a huge question, right? And I think that, you know, what Shahad Bashir was talking about, that we've all inherited this kind of Orientalist framework. So before you write about music in Islam, you are obliged to write a page or a chapter or on something about, is music forbidden and is it not forbidden, and what does the Quran say and what does the Hadith say, and well, maybe not, you know. And I think, you know, if we didn't have all that literature to wade through, we might not be so hung up on it. So I was at Pondok Pesantren Tebu Ireng last August. They have a great big bedug in front of the mosque, right? So this is an Indonesian edition. And I don't know if they have kantongan or not, but they're, you know, the wooden idiophone. So, well, I'm sorry that he forbid that, and I don't agree with him. But I think there are many more examples where, you know, Indonesians are actually proud of the fact that they have a bedug, even if they never use it in front of the mosque, right? Even though maybe, you know, they didn't have bedug in, you know, in Saudi Arabia, right, or elsewhere. You know, Emha Ainun Najib once said to me, he said, he was in London and Cat Stevens came to his concert. Cat Stevens is a really important singer, songwriter, was a rock star who converted to Islam and left music. He did hijrah before we invented that term hijrah, right? So he did hijrah famously, and then little by little he started making Islamic music again. And so Chatnun said to me, he said, so I said to Cat Stevens, you know, I invited him to our concert. So he came to our concert, and I said, how did you get to the concert? And he said, well, I drove a car. And he said, see, it was a tool for you to get from one place to the other. He said, we use music as a tool to get from one place to the other. You know, I mean, he has these beautiful responses. And then talking about what's permissible in the mosque. So yesterday, or Wednesday, I was with Habib Sheikh. Okay, so this is an eccentric example, right? But clearly one that thousands and thousands of people are looking to. And so I was playing, and this Majlis Az-Zahir was accompanying with Hajj Marawis, and everybody was singing. And then I could see, you know, I was sort of like sitting kind of right next to him, but a little bit behind, but I was on the same platform with him, with my oud in the mosque. And then I could see him doing like this, you know, and I said, I gave somebody my phone, and I said, turn on the video because I knew, and sure enough, two people got up and started doing Zaffin, you know, the dance that is also such an Indian Ocean thing, right? So you can always find people who are going to complain and who want to have rules to follow and say, can't do this, can't do that. But I mean, especially in Indonesia, you can certainly find so many examples where people say, you know, this is a tool to lead people closer to the faith, to you know, to celebrate the creativity that people feel, and hopefully not be too pressured by their neighbors that say, you know, don't hit the kantongan. So that's kind of a roundabout story, just with some examples, but you know, not definitive response. But it's a great question.
So maybe I'll take 2 other questions. Anyone? Okay. Ibu Dina, ya? Yeah. Silakan. And then the last one, the lady at the back. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Anne. I enjoy the presentation. I enjoy how you interpret the Islamic music in Indonesia. So I'm Nia Deliana from Faculty of Social Sciences. You know, it just reminded me with the incident several years ago where the president invited a Quran reciter, but the reciter, you know, read it in some kind of ethnic languages, yes, and it caused kind of controversial, viral stuff. There are so many political identities played out of this. So if you want to define, you know, if you want to interpret music, in Islamic music, do you, how, to what extent you can include, you know, ethnicity into Islamic music? Yeah, thank you.
Well, I don't know if you were here for that.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Liliana, is it? Nian, okay. Thank you so much for that question. So I did mention that when I came here in 2017, everybody asked me about that. What did you think about this controversy? And so I had to learn about it, you know, and what is Langgam Jawa, and why would people say, oh my God, Langgam Jawa? Tidak boleh, absolutely not. And so according to, you know, Maria Ulfa, she said, oh yes, people went crazy and they made the right. Majlis Ulama Indonesia, they said, go have a conference and go make a decision, and everybody was, you know, lodging their complaints. And I see it as an allegory, or a kind of, you know, a harbinger, which is a symbol of something that's going to come, of what was happening right at that moment with Ahok, right? All these people say, oh, he said this verse. Oh, he shouldn't have said this verse. Absolutely, we should throw him in jail. Well, come on, he just said the verse. It's not that big of a, no, absolutely, you know, throw him in jail. And it was a huge, you know, huge event here. So when you go to Masabakat Tilawatil Quran, there are rules, right? And people judge and award points. And they even award points for melody, right? The melodies of the Quran, which come from, you know, the Arab maqamat, right, which I'm going to show you a little bit of in a moment. But it's clear that not everybody knows how to do that perfectly, right, or even knows how to evaluate it. It's clear that when Islam moves around through history and through, you know, through geography, that even though the ideal is to channel the archetypal moment when recitation was handed down through Malaikat Jibril, right? And we want to just reproduce that lots of individual, either the characteristic, the ciri khas of individual reciters, or the region, right? Like, you know, when you're in the middle of the Indonesian village in 1940, you think they're listening to recordings? Do you think they have access to the reciters that just got back from Mecca? No, there has to be variation. I mean, when I listen to Turkish reciters, I can tell they're Turkish reciters because of their vowels right away. Their vowels are different. You know, I've heard Indonesian, like in training sessions where reciters here will say, this is wonderful, but don't do this in an international competition. Right? Acknowledging that there are things that people like here that are really cool, but don't do it in an international competition because it's not considered, you know, pop. And I think in terms of Langgam Jawa, you know, the one thing again, and you know, I have to thank Haja Maria Olfa again for this idea. She said, you know, these people who were stamping their fists and saying, no, it's not allowed, it's not possible, she said, you know, they really don't know anything about Javanese culture. And when they hear Langgam Jawa, they're thinking of Tayuban, where you have this beautiful woman who's wearing, you know, kabaya, and maybe she's dancing at a wedding, and maybe people are putting money down her shirt, and that's what their mind goes to. So it's not the notes themselves that are criminal, it's the association that you have with that music. And but then she also said, you know, it's hard to do tajweed with Langgam Jawa. She said it's just better to do it with, you know, with Arabic maqam. So, but I think in some ways there's also a kind of resurgence of people wanting to recite in local melodies, saying like, you know, I respect the Quran. I'm a reciter. I'd like to, you know, localize this, you know, this. So it's not the only example that we have there. But I learned more that Jokowi invited him to do that specifically, right? It wasn't just a surprise. So yeah, but it's a great. I'm glad it's still a good. I'm glad it's still an exciting issue. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe one more question before Ibu Ann plays an ode. Anyone? Or shall we just like go right away? Oh, if no one asks me. Yeah,
Please.
Fariki.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Or maybe this one.
It will be okay. Yeah, Jack.
There we go.
Check. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. It's great presentations, and I learned a lot. And you open up some, well, information that we don't really knows before. First of all, like the Asia Africa Islamic Conference, you know, and I think we need to dig up more about that.
Yeah.
That's number one. And number two, well, since you are mentioning or you are discussing about the not only Indonesia Muslim music, but also its connection with Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the Indian Ocean is so important in the intersections of culture and civilizations for Indonesia and people across the region. So I just thinking that it would be good also to explore for the future studies connecting of the music in Indian Ocean with the larger Austronesian culture. So
Yeah.
I think there would be
Big.
some patterns
Yeah.
we might able to looking at it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. And I think this is really like, you know, intellectual history moves along, right? The questions that people asked 50 years ago seem ridiculous to us now, or they seem very racist. And I'm sure people will look at our work in 50 years and say, why were they doing that, right? We've moved on from that. You know, I see a lot of the humanities moving away from methodological nationalism, like using the nation state as the unit of analysis, right? So we look at, you know, music of India or politics of India, and then politics of Kenya, or gender in Kenya, or you know, gender here or there, and thinking much more about inter-ocean connections, in part because the nation is a colonialist idea anyway, right? And when you establish a nation with a national language and a national flag and a national food, you have to erase a bunch of other things, right? This is what we're seeing in, you know, in Israel and Gaza right now, right? That all these, yeah. So I'm all for it. The question is, how do you liberate yourself from this kind of these historic, you know, the historiographic, causal narratives that we're all addicted to, right? First there was this, and then it changed, and then it became this, and then it became this. And so that idea of micro-histories, like, you know, trying to find specific examples of a lot of, you know, smaller histories with different connections, I think that's about all I can do, right? But you're absolutely right, and I don't, that would be the lands below the winds, right? The basement, right? Yeah.
Why I mentioned that because you talk also about the Zanzibar music, and if we're looking at the this area from Zanzibar to the whole of Indian Ocean and Indonesia, and might be extended beyond. This is the label of Austronesia, you know, becoming so important to be put into the area of the studies as well. Yeah,
So
thank you.
Yeah, names are important,
Yeah.
right? And speaking of names, those guys were in Malang. That was a wedding in Malang, but they named their band Zanzibar, right? So, you know, it's so interesting. Yeah. You good?
We still have like maybe 10 more minutes
Okay.
before we end the program, but we really would like to hear what you can play for us this evening.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. So this instrument is the gambus, or it's called the oud. The gambus is from the word, the Arabic Yemeni word kanbus, and it originally came. This instrument kanbus with kaf, came from Yemen and that area. We have examples of it again in India, and also in Indonesia. So I have, you know, wonderful musicians who play this instrument in the Malay areas of like North Sumatra. And that instrument would be carved from one solid piece of wood and with a skin face. And you can probably look it up, right? But this is the modern Arabic oud. So it's very light. It weighs, you know, like a couple of pounds maybe. It's, you know, thin pieces of wood are stretched over a mold, and then there are no frets on the instrument, so you can play quarter tones, and there are the tuning pegs are not, you know, guitars have machine pegs with, these are just like violin or cello pegs here. So that's another interesting aspect. It's in double courses. And the fact that there are no frets allow us to play quarter tones. So for example, scale there, this note in the middle, it's makam bayati, and that note in the middle is actually a half flat. So you couldn't play that on the piano. It's in between the white note and the black note on the piano. And it's kind of like if you recite Quran, right, you start in makam bayati, right? And there's so many variations in makam bayati. One of my reciter friends, when I was doing that research, he said, you know, he was talking about an Egyptian sheikh. He said, you know, that sheikh, he could recite in Nahawand, he could recite in Maqam Rast, whatever, but when he recited in Maqam Bayati, he could go on and on and on. He said, we would leave my house and I would drive him all the way to the airport, and he still was in Maqam Bayati, right? Such an amazing quote. So, interestingly, the name of the instrument gambus is also the name of a genre of music called gambus. So we have lots of orkes gambus in Indonesia, which use gambus, but it's common in Indonesia that the name of an instrument also becomes the name of a genre, like qasida rabana or haja marawis, right? You use the name of the instrument to also talk about the style of music. If you've has anybody heard of the group Sebyan? Right? They call their music gambus. They don't even use a gambus. So that's hilarious, right? I mean, it's such an interesting way that language works. Like, I could look on videos. It's like, why do they call this gambus? Like, there's no gambus. Like, what? How could that be? Pat Daddy, will you sing something with me? Or that? I mean, do you know? Everybody in the room. Could we sing? I'll play a taksim, or maybe I know. I'll play a dulab in Makam Bayati, since this is such a beautiful mode. And then I'll play a taqasim, so this improvisation, which is really key to the music, right? This is a classical music that requires its best artists to improvise. It's very different from Western music, right? Where we think about improvisation as country music, or people who don't read music, traditional music, they improvise, or jazz musicians improvise. But classical musicians read notes from the page, right? So in Arabic music, and in many other classical musics of Asia, the real height of the tradition is improvisation, right? So I'll play a little introduction, and then I'll do a taqasim, and then how about we do Salim wa Salim Da, something like that? Okay. And you have to help me, because I'm not going to remember all the words. Oh, let's see. You want more? Okay, but I tell you, compared to the event. Yeah. Yes. Come, Pat Daddy. Come. We've already done shows together. I'm not too picky. Of us?
Unbelievable.
We need a little more rehearsal.
I think we should.
Yeah. So if I were teaching here, I would have an ensemble.
Yeah.
I would.
Isn't that a great idea?
And you would bring me songs from your area and your parents and your grandparents, and we could work on them.
Right.
Whenever you invite me. Sebenarnya saya untung sekali ada cuti dari urusan profesor. This is my sabbatical. Jadi sebenarnya harus duduk di meja dan menulis sepanjang hari, tapi what am I doing? Keliling-keliling Indonesia. Sangat lebih enak, ya. But you know, the interesting thing about that song is that it's a muwasha. It's an Arabic muwasha that has not religious words. Right. Like so many Arabic songs come here, and they get Sharia-ized. Yeah. It's part of the Sharia-ization, right? But it's really just a creative way of taking tunes that are floating around this Austronesian Indian Ocean world and adapting them to.
So they're actually just regular pop songs, right?
Well, they're you know, it's more classical poetry.
Right.
Like
no, even the most contemporary one, like
yeah.
the one by Amr Diab, like Habibi Ya Nurul Ain or something like that.
Yeah. Kulthum, yeah. Those are always thought of as religious songs, or like. That's also a song that's, it's a love song, and you find it in Arabic and Turkish and Greek and so many languages. You come to Indonesia, it's a religious song. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's been remarkable to hear Prof. Rasmussen's presentation this evening, today, and we are very delighted. And let's give her another round of applause. Thank you so much, Ian.
And did somebody take a picture that I can have so I can put it up?
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
will somebody take a picture of Pat Daddy and I? and we have to have a picture with the book and.
Yeah, and you know, for many of us here, students, lecturers, academics, we hear about some new, insightful, you know, presentation from you, Ibu Ann, from the idea of motivation, permissibility, and then what else? Against the unitary Islam, about the rich and captivating Islam in Indonesia, with all the noisiness and things like that. Unbelievable. Even the birds, you know.
Even the birds, yeah. This is good.
So it's been remarkable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we bring this event to a close, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Shafiq Hashim, the head of the IIIU Library and Cultural Center, and also Parif Kimuna and all the university executives and all of you, audience, participants, students, lecturers, everyone here. Thank you so much. And of course, Ibu Ann.
Before you say salam alaikum, can I add one thing?
Sure.
Okay, 1 second.
Oh yeah, boleh. Group selfie ya. Okay, sure. Yeah.
So, this is my colleague and my friend. He's also my agent.
Secret agent.
And he's very busy and he's so smart, but he always has time to send me a reference or get on Zoom. And then I say, you know, I was thinking about coming to Indonesia. He said, oh, Ibu Ann, that's a great idea. And then the next week, it's like, oh, and you can go to Bandung, and you can come here, and Pak Shafiq wants you to come. And oh, by the way, could you come and talk to my classes? So really for me, you know, going from last night rehearsing with Jamuri in Solo is great, but I have really so enjoyed being able to be in so many academic contexts and talking to smart, you know, professors and lecturers and researchers like you, and also getting to know students. It's such a source of inspiration for my own work, and it really enriches what I do. So I have a small ole ole for my agent.
Oh.
And his wife. And his wife.
Terima kasih.
Of course.
Terima kasih.
Yeah, of course.
Terima kasih, Ibu Ann.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have a group selfie. Maybe Ibu Ann
Oh,
standing
yeah, great.
with
With the
ode,
ode?
you know, looking at the camera here.
Bisa nggak? Why don't you hold the book, because even though it's not my book, they'll be very happy that I. That's from Damascus, actually. That bag.
From Damascus, wow. Ibu Nia.
don't mind, if someone could also do one with mine.
Mending duduk, Pak. Duduk. Lebih bagus ya. Bunyi dah. Oke. 1, 2, 3. Sekali lagi. 1, 2, 3. Jangan gaya bebas, gaya bebas. Satu, dua. Oke. By phone? Mas. Supaya tetap dipakai. Satu, dua. Nice.
Saya mau selfie juga.
Yeah. There we go. We also would like to thank our organizers and all the audience for their participation, thoughtful questions, and engaging dialogue. Please stay connected with us for more future events on the distinguished guest lectures. We look forward to continue to bring more entertaining sessions in the months ahead. Thank you so much.